Is not okay with Oka, or is it? The problems, the promises, and the prospects. Go ye and form the coalitions. Pen to paper at last on the party's bill. Who gains and who loses? The mamas, the math, and the many options. On the kicker tonight, many options. On the kicker tonight, garbage in, garbage out. A lesson in waste management in Kenyan politics. Yvonne takes a deep dive into the Yala River saga, a crying shame. Who wants to eat their cake and have it? The civil servants? The punchline is a thumbs up to a judge. And on the angle tonight, backing the wrong tree in the forest saga.
We may not know who's going with us or who will be our comrades at arms on this mission. But we know who they will not be.
We will work with ANC.
My brother Musalia just acted in a manner typical of a suicide bomber.
Today as we speak, Musalia Mudavadi, Moses Masika Wetangula are our two Yonas who are in the belly of the UDA fish.
All right, so all kinds of illustrations there. Can we call them allegories, euphemisms, and whatever they are, analogies? Interesting political terminologies there. Let me note at this point that Jamila Mohammed is still on an extended break tonight. Wilson Mushora, however, is here as the fifth gangster doing sign language interpretation for us tonight. But we'll start with, are those the aftershocks, the tremors, and whatever else they've been called? Linas, Bomas happens on Sunday, and this is Thursday. We are still talking about it. There must be something that happened there.
That's right, because of the positioning, the use of the name earthquake made sure that this is going to be a long discussion. And you've seen a lot of analysis, different people giving different opinions about whether this was an earthquake or not, the significance of the events at the Bomas of Kenya. But it did two things, in my view. One, it actually gave Deputy President William Ruto the first nationally recognizable face in his campaign. Before this, DP William Ruto was not doing well in terms of who are you with, because...
I'm just curious though, is it Mudavadi or Wetangula, because it was two people?
I don't know, I don't know why the profile of Musalia Mudavadi is suddenly way, way bigger than that of Moses Wetangula. But Wetangula seems, in my view, to have been swallowed by this arrangement. He's not popping out in a lot of the analysis, and I don't think it'll pop up on this test either. I don't think we have any kind of way of doing it. So this is Musalia Mudavadi, William Ruto show. So for Ruto, he immediately gets that benefit of that recognizable face of a former presidential candidate, former vice president, someone with a profile in his campaign. But number two, former Speaker Marende calls it suicide bomber. There is something Musalia Mudavadi did, and that is to basically blow up his political standing as far as Western Kenya is concerned. Because there seems to have been very little in terms of preparation from his end. He did this as an individual, because you look around him and say, who did you go out with from the Western Kenya leadership? And you can only show Senators Malala and Senator Sakaja of Nairobi. You do not have these other big names, so to speak. So this is your own mission. So in my view, it looked like, in terms of Western Kenya, and you can see from the reactions that this is not really a very popular move that Musalia Mudavadi has made. And one last point on what comes out of Sunday is the oxymoron and how ironic this whole thing was on the part of Musalia Mudavadi. Musalia Mudavadi walked out of the shell that he has sold to Kenyans for a very, very long time. He sells to Kenyans an image of a principled politician who stays as close as possible to what he says. Because Musalia Mudavadi has been very blistering when it comes to attacking William Ruto and attacking UDA and attacking corruption. And he stayed true to form in his speech. He made a very powerful acceptance speech. I don't know whether it's correct to call it acceptance because...
Yes.
From the delegates, right?
From the delegates.
He was supposedly receiving the mandate from the delegates.
They gave him something and he was accepting it.
Okay, so that speech was very, very powerful, very well written. It contained all the right notes for a person who wants to run a different campaign from everything else that is available.
And I think we can listen to one of those things that he said about UDA. Musalia Mudavadi speaking, Linus calls it blistering comments that he had about UDA not too long ago.
Pengine mnashangaa hii bottom up inaanzia wapi? Hii bottom na inasumbua watu, imesumbua watu wengi sana. Watu wamechanganyikiwa vibaya sana na hii bottom up.
If you did this and you say bottoms up, this is the bottom. Mtu anameza kila kitu. Na mwananchi atapata nini?
Yeah, that's completely unflattering. Eh?
It is, and there's something else he actually does say of the party he then entered into an alliance with, UDA. Let's listen to that. Mudavadi speaking about UDA.
Okay.
All right, I don't think the clip is there, but to paraphrase the clip, he was calling it Yuda in reference to the biblical Judas
Iscariot, yes.
Judas Iscariot, and basically calling it betrayal. Now, with this conviction tone, and Mudavadi is gifted with that. He speaks with a voice that can actually persuade. It sounds very truthful and earnest. He would say that, look, munajua Yuda ni nani, betrayal. And then he finds himself in this event. He makes a speech that is highly critical of the government, which in itself is ironic, considering that Deputy President William Ruto remains the #2 of this administration. And he himself has gone on record as recently as today of taking credit for what this government has done. I think you saw earlier, Ronnie was speaking in Kiambu and touting the record of roads and railway and all that. And here is Mudavadi saying, you've got it all wrong as an administration, from corruption to ill governance, etc. So it sounded... Yes, it sounded a bit confusing for him to take that road that is highly critical, and then not announce that he is actually running a race against the same administration whose deputy is actually the person he's entered into an alliance with.
And Francis, that I think was a very interesting aspect of what was happening at Bomas, where you actually have Mudavadi giving this very powerful speech. I mean, in the eyes of many people, it was a powerful speech that ought to come from somebody who is running against the record of an incumbent government, and talked about the corruption, talked about, and I think this time very direct, even attacking the president and all of that, and talked about the debt that he said is over the top, and all kinds of things that he says have happened under the watch of this current government. And that would have been great, except for the fact that right behind him was the person who is the deputy president in that very government, and that must be a very difficult thing to deal with if he keeps saying those things, and yet at the same time he still has the deputy president there. He's not going anywhere.
It sounded like a Damascus moment in some way, because here is a speech which I thought was very well structured, it struck all the right notes in terms of the state of the economy, the public debt, basically what many Kenyans would want to say, what many Kenyans would want to hear in terms of a proper state of the nation. But there were a few inconsistencies, if I looked at it that way, because one half of the government that you accuse of inaction in terms of the country's economy and everything else was present. On the other hand, there were a series of meetings that the ANC leader had attended at State House Nairobi, at State House Mombasa, with the very same president who is the leader of the government that he accuses of neglecting Kenyans and inaction, allowing runaway corruption, and so on and so forth. Some of these things were they told to the president in his face in Mombasa and in Nairobi. Were the same things told to the deputy president before this function or at that function? So there's, to me, I felt there was some inconsistency. But at the same time, I thought it was a huge gamble for the ANC leader. If it works, it will work for him. If it doesn't work, it will be a big flop on his part. Because where he put himself, I would say, was a fix. If it works, it will work when he's in. If it doesn't work, it will not work while he's part of it. It will be very difficult for him now that he has already declared that he is in a working relationship with the deputy president. They even staged a rally in Nakuru yesterday. They staged another one in Bungoma tomorrow. He's in it. It will be very difficult for him to get there and say, hey, I'm now pulling out because I realized what I was looking for is not here. And whether he's in the presidential race or not is another question. Well, there's speculation that he may not be in the race. He hasn't declared it formally himself, at least. So the assumption still is that he's in the race. Now the question is, how will he be in the presidential race? And has teamed up with the deputy president, who's also in the presidential race. So one of them will have to give way to the other. And I certainly don't think the deputy president will pave the way.
We'll have invested all this many years in that. And we will explore that a little bit more, because we really want to look at what this means for all of these people. But Yvonne, let's go a little bit to the speech. I mean, as someone who follows conversations about the economy and that sort of thing, it is a speech that many people perhaps would have wanted to hear, especially at this time. And I think that there must have been people who are saying, yes, I can identify with that. Yes, that is true, and that sort of thing. And if only it ended there.
Yeah, and like Francis said, it struck all the right notes. And during his speech, first of all, I must say, you know, for a man who's played it safe in politics for quite some time, even touted himself as, you know, the man who's a safe pair of hands for the country, really came out robustly. And I thought, okay, might this actually be the earthquake? So he said all the right things. He talked about the country's debt. He talked about the economy, and you know, gave for the first time, was very pointed and direct and said, this is where the problem lies. It lies with the president. In many interviews before, we have not seen him as direct, you know, as putting the blame where it lies, or responsibility, if you like, and saying, this is what the president has done. So, and also coming out as sort of the alternative voice from everything we've been hearing on the campaign trail. We haven't heard too many people addressing the very issues about, you know, the price of goods, you know, the high inflation in the country. So he was actually saying all of the right things. Now, here's the challenge, and I think that's been said around the table already, that he is then backed by somebody who, if you all remember, in the very first term of this administration from 2013 to 2017, when the relationship between the president and the deputy president was at its best, at its peak, they were constantly defending their borrowing. In fact, you know, for those who would want to remember, in the first 3 years of the Jubilee administration from 2013, they borrowed more money than the Kibaki administration had borrowed in its entire full term, that's 10 years. So we borrowed more in the first 3 years than Kibaki did in his 10-year term. And at the time, there was a lot of robust defense about, the projects that we were taking in, about, doing infrastructure. And then we saw Musalia, who, by the way, has been consistent with his message.
To his credit, yes.
Yes, he has been really consistent on that for, I think since 2017, that hatutakula reli, we will not eat infrastructure. This borrowing is going overboard. How much are we paying? In fact, remember, he came up with some of those very details about for every 100 shillings, that we make, 70 shillings of that is going towards paying our debt. So all of that was really great. Now, listen, a man is allowed to change his mind. However, for somebody who just the other day, by the way, was actually, in fact, criticizing the deputy president, saying that he was using, resources. You remember that audio clip, him saying, anatumia pesa za serikali, ile simu anatumia analipiwa na nani, zile magari, yale magari anatumia na nani, anaishi katika nyumba ya... It's okay that he would change his mind, but I think it's going to be incumbent upon him to then explain to his followers, to the electorate, to people that he hopes will vote for him, just what changed. Did he sit down and have a conversation with the deputy president and they were able to iron out all of these issues? And then that changed his mind and said, oh, okay, I see it and I understand what you did and how you did it. So those are some of the things that, he's going to have to deal with. But I dare say, though, when you take a look at the wider political landscape, when it comes to Kenyans looking for an alternative, someone that then says, we're going to have a departure from what we have had over the last 9 years, and it'll be 10, in about 6.5 months, or we're moving in a different direction, or we're moving, forward from this, we're going to try and fix some of these mistakes. Seeing as we've had now this earthquake moment, do we really have that alternative? Take a look at what is now Kenya Kwanza. So you have, Musalia and Deputy President William Ruto.
And Wetangula as well.
Yes, and Wetangula as well. But to be fair, Wetangula does not want to run for president. He's going to run for Senate. So in the scheme of things, and as much as he's a party leader. He's a party leader. But
they have he's a principal.
Okay,
yes,
we're talking about somebody who's going to take the reins of this country. And right now, Weta is not it. So, but if you take a look at this alliance now, so you've got much of what we've had for the last 10 years, right? So you have Ruto and Musalia and that alliance. And if you take a look at the other side, we seem to have much of the same thing, right? In Azimio, you've got Raila, who's being backed by, President Uhuru Kenyatta. And so you have to now ask, of voters, what alternative are they going to be getting? It seems to be much of the same. Raila Odinga also changing tune and, supporting and touting many of the government projects that he once criticized and called, in fact, if I recall, over-borrowing, overspending, and over-stealing. And now he is, defending the president's record, him and his allies. And then you've got Musalia, who's defending, or rather working with the deputy president. And so you start to ask, where is the alternative? Or in 2017, will we have pretty much, of the same as we have seen over the last 10 years?
And I think that is perhaps what supporters of Musalia Mudavadi will be saying, who hasn't changed their minds. I mean, we have a situation where everything looks so confused, where you have Raila Odinga, who was the opposition leader, still he is, at least he says so. But you find a situation where the opposition leader is actually being supported by the outgoing president. You find a situation where the deputy president is actually the main opposition.
And Joe, let me add, like you say, someone is allowed to change their minds, but we haven't heard explanations on either side.
I guess
Musalia hasn't explained what's changed. Uhuru has not explained, at least to the people, what changed with Ruto, and neither has Raila explained the over-borrowing, over-pending, over-stealing.
And actually, that's the biggest issue that you hear people, for example, in central Kenya say, well, you came here and told us a few things about Raila Odinga and about William Ruto, and you haven't come to tell us a different story. So I guess that over the next few months, what really these politicians will be dealing with is that very question, that can you at least bring us up to speed? What has happened? I mean, I'm not too sure that in the end that really matters to many people. I think most of the voters, because our votes usually go in a certain way. I mean, people listen to leaders a lot in this country. So sometimes it's really not the rationality of the explanation, but sometimes it is just having the conversations with the people and trying to drag them along. But I want us to look at the political implications of this. Obviously, nothing happens in this country that means absolutely nothing. I think this is something that we've had different people talk about. So the former vice president, many people forget that Musalia Mudavadi used to be a vice president. He was vice president for 2 and something months, but he was part of OCA after the dissolution of NASA. And we saw the dramatic scenes at the Bomas of Kenya, where some of the NASA the OCA principles, to emphasize what Kai was talking about, actually stormed out. And right now, Linus, they are out there. We saw today Kalonzo Musyoka, Cyrus Jirongo, and Gideon Moi. They were out there in Ukambani, and they're saying, look, this thing is going on. In fact, Kalonzo Musyoka saying, this has now made my journey or my path to state. Now he sees a clearer path to State House than when Musalia Mudavadi was there. So he basically saying, it looks I'm the only Farasi left in Oka.
Yeah, it's in a way sorted out the OKA primaries that were so difficult to get a formula. So it's about...
You mean the boardroom meetings?
Yes. But I just wanted Joe to talk about the problems Musalia Mudavadi seems to encounter during political transitions, because they are uniquely Musalias. Yeah. And I remember covering a press conference way back in 2002 in Transcom House. He was a minister for transport at the time. Yeah. And KANU was divided over Moi's proposal to have Uhuru Kenyatta as his successor. And Musalia Mudavadi, and typical of Musalia Mudavadi, there's one thing we should confirm. He always sits on the fence before he makes the next move, before he falls on either side of this, either side of the fence. But in Oka, really seriously, they went into construction of fences because they told Kenyans nothing for a very, very long time. And they were all, 3 of them, seated, busy constructing a fence. In 2002, Musalia Mudavadi was conflicted between supporting Uhuru Kenyatta and going to the National Rainbow Coalition that had picked the likes of Saitoti, who was vice president, and Raila Odinga, who was the KANU Secretary General. And I think what we were told at the time was he got a call. I mean, President Moi was a serious mobilizer and firm leader as well in terms of let's go in this direction. And he changed his mind. There was this press conference. They worked together with Uhuru Kenyatta. Had a very brief press conference. Joe, you might remember this. And they took no questions. And he declared that I'm going to support Uhuru Kenyatta. Yes. He made that clear.
He talked about soul searching, I remember.
Yes. And before that, there was President Moi was coming back from a foreign trip, and the whole KANU team was there to receive him at the airport. And I remember Raila Odinga standing with Musalia Mudavadi on the corner and chatting for a very, very long time. Obviously, it was to try and convince him to go the Rainbow Way. That was 2002. When it came to the next transition, and I mean transition, what I mean by transition is the end of the 2-term period for president. Skip 2007 and come to 2013, when President Mwai Kibaki had completed his second term. In 2012, we heard of something called Mademoni moment, where Uhuru Kenyatta had apparently suggested or proposed that Musalia Mudavadi should indeed be the successor to President Mwai Kibaki. And then there was a meeting down at the Multimedia University. And out of that, Uhuru made a very interesting speech, if you remember that, and said, no, those were demons that told me to go in that direction. And just like that, Musalia Mudavadi found himself running as presidential candidate on his own in 2013. Now we are in the third transition, Mudavadi is going through something. And the thing that is unique about this one is he is not placed himself exactly as a presidential candidate. He's being regarded as throwing his weight behind William Ruto. There are some theories coming out here that, could Deputy President Ruto cede the place and say Musalia Mudavadi should be the presidential candidate.
Musalia Tosha kind of thing.
Musalia Tosha kind of thing. I find this far-fetched because Deputy President William Ruto has campaigned longest than any other presidential candidate in the history of this country for office of president. Remember, from first term and to second term, he's basically been on the campaign trail. Do you think, realistically, he'll do all that to and do a Madimoni Part 2 kind of thing? I don't think so.
Interesting, but like I said, this means all kinds of things to all kinds of people across the political spectrum. And Francis, maybe you will jump in on the Oka issue, because it is an issue that they basically had a race there. Now it is not there. But the question now there is, has Oka been affected fatally by the departure of Musalia Mudavadi? Because, I mean, we've seen them going out there, they're saying, oh, we are still strong. Are they?
Most definitely they are. In fact, I tended to think on Sunday, shortly after that function, I think the major earthquake was the death of Oka at its infancy, if you may like it. Because here is a team that had told us that it would offer alternative leadership. And even going to the extent of continuously saying it is not a two-horse race, as has been framed. Actually accused us in the media of pitching these as a two-horse race. Perpetuating a two-horse race. But here you are, one half of that One Kenya Alliance has teamed up with the Deputy President, one of the horses. The other half of One Kenya Alliance is still out there. Kalonzo Musyoka was in Kitui today and will be in Ukambani tomorrow and Saturday before moving to Kirinyaga and Bomet on Sunday and Monday. And he says today that the path is clear. To paraphrase what LK is saying, the question on who will be the Oka flag bearer sorted out organically, if you may like it that way, because they couldn't agree, even during that technical committee meeting in Elementaita. Now that Musalia has exited, in fact, he did not have very nice things to say about One Kenya Alliance. Neither did he have very nice things to say about Azimio. So you can clearly see where his path heads and where Kalonzo's path heads. So now the choice will have to be made whether the remaining part of One Kenya Alliance walks the whole journey to the ballot on August 9th, or maybe decides to team up with Raila. Those are the two options available, whichever option they decide to take. I listened to Kalonzo today talk about one particular person, Musalia Mudavadi, and to some extent also talk about Moses Wetangula. Let's first hear what he said about Musalia, then Wetangula.
My brother Mudavadi, ile hatua pengine bado hajatuambia kama ametoka Oka, hajasema kama ametoka Oka. Kwa sababu aliyetangaza jana ni mwenzake, akasema wataenda sijui Rift Valley, hapa wakitoka hapo wataenda Nakuru, wataenda wapi. Yeye mwenyewe hakusema. Hata hivyo, tukio la jana limeweka njia sawa. I think my other friends were causing traffic jam. Jam imeondoka. Sasa ni Ikulu direct. Weta and I have come a long way. Even if it becomes imperative that my brother Weta goes a separate way, it will be painful for me. But this is a brother that I have known. And I want to ask that he reconsiders because they have not announced they're leaving One Kenya Alliance. I want to finish this struggle with a person I trust. called Moses Masika Wetangula.
Yeah, you see, he says one thing, but in two different ways. He doesn't seem to say very nice things about Musalia, but we're still hopeful that Wetangula will reconsider his move. But on the other hand, you see, it was a movement as a pair, Musalia and Wetangula. So that got me thinking. Then in One Kenya Alliance, Kalonzo's chief rival for the presidential ticket certainly must have been Musalia. And so still thinking there's a possibility of working again with Wetangula in one way or another, but almost ruling out working with Musalia, and could explain why. Because if they couldn't agree on who among them will fly the One Kenya Alliance ticket, then you can see what we were not seeing inside the Oka team is now being made clear to us via those kind of sound bites.
But it does leave them in an interesting position, because here we are. I mean, we know that this country works a certain way when it comes to voting patterns and that sort of thing. So one would assume that if there was a block that Musalia Mudavadi was bringing, that obviously usually subject of a big debate, but assuming it is there, then he probably has left with it. So we have here Kalonzo Musyoka, who still has some considerable influence. Obviously, we do not know how much now, in Ukambani, where he was today.
Eastern, yeah.
And beyond that, then it becomes difficult to place where else you would say he has great influence. I mean, at least going by previous elections and just how this country's politics works. What then does that mean for his own presidential bid now that he's saying sasa ni Ikulu direct?
Right, and which was probably why they went to Kitui today, to just sort of stamp his authority, you know, with respect to the Eastern voting bloc. But I think it places him in an interesting position now. Would he go it alone? Would he want to be courted, or I imagine both sides would be courting him. The UDA, ANC, and Ford Kenya camp versus the Azimio camp, because, you know, he's definitely one that either of them might be seeing or looking towards getting on board. I mean, certainly getting the Eastern voting bloc would be, even if it's for purposes of image, like we were saying, you know, at the start of the show, that, you know, now you've got Eastern as well, you know, as other parts of the country. So that places him actually in an interesting position and might actually make him now be the one to watch and now be the one that could possibly be courted by others. But if you take a look at, you know, the One Kenya Alliance, and, you know, we're saying sort of maybe the earthquake was announcing the end of the One Kenya Alliance, but let's be fair, there were quite a few interesting issues that some would say were perhaps not moves in the right direction from the beginning, that were signs that the One Kenya Alliance wasn't, you know, perhaps headed in the right direction. How many meetings have they had, you know, over the last 6 months alone to just try and figure out a formula to pick their presidential candidate? There have been many. In fact, they have been accused of having, rather than rallies, as we've seen with the deputy president, who's actually been out going to seek the mandate of the people, and the same for Raila Odinga with his Azimio la Umoja movement, they've largely been in boardrooms, largely been at hotels, you know, trying to figure out this formula. So that right there was, you know, one of those issues that said, well, you know, One Kenya Alliance was struggling to begin with. And then come the various visits to State House. How many were they, including State House in Mombasa? Was it about 4 or 5, Gashuri? And, you know, seemingly being, you know, lectured or herded in a particular direction.
Whipped, if you may like.
Whipped, actually, yeah. So that also wasn't a good look for the One Kenya Alliance from the beginning. Where does this leave them now? Kalonzo says he sees a clear path to it. But also there's, you know, there's Kalonzo, and now how many principals are left in the One Kenya Alliance? 2?
Gideon and Jirongo.
And Gideon and Jirongo. So that is 3 in total. And where does this leave Gideon Moi and KANU? Well, Gideon Moi and KANU have been in a post-election coalition agreement with Jubilee Party.
Jubilee, which is in Azimio.
Jubilee, which is now in Azimio. Many will remember that Gideon Moi was the only one who attended the Azimio la Umoja movement when it was launched
December 10th, yes.
on December 10th, and, you know, has been seemingly leaning towards that end. So you know, if one were to speculate where Gideon Moi and KANU stands, perhaps, so this could actually be, I don't know if it could be a moment for Kalonzo to do the katikati, you know, thing once again, but it certainly, I think, leaves him as possibly the one to court from either side.
Just a small addition to that. You see, we are looking at a presidential election that is likely to be very closely contested. This is where every vote will count. If we have a voter register of about 21.5 million currently, let's say even the ongoing voter registration fetches another 1 million. Talk about 22 million. Plus or minus, let's say standardized 20 million voter register. You are talking about looking for 10 million votes to become president. So every vote will count. Every vote will count in the sense that if your opponent garners votes from another region or teams up with a leader from another region who can fetch them votes, then it means it eliminates you from the presidential election. And any vote, let's say that Kalonzo gets on his own, that probably doesn't end up in either of the two baskets. If we were to follow the two-horse race theory, it would be injurious to both camps. And would it also be far-fetched to talk about a runoff in the event that he decides to go all the way? That's also a possibility. Because you're talking about a situation where every vote will be critical. Because if it is 10 million plus one votes, then it means you have to do your math in such a way that you gain as much as you can and ensure that you lose very little from your camp.
I would like us to talk about Raila Odinga in this context, because what happened at Bomas, yes, it had implications for the DP, as Linus mentioned, that there's a certain image question that the arrival of Musalia Mudavadi deals with to a certain degree when it comes to the deputy president's lineup on the other side. We have heard a few things about what he's doing at to Oka. I mean, they still seem to be in a bit of a wilderness. They haven't quite given us a clear path where they're going. But what about Raila Odinga? I mean, there are many people who, and Linus, you know this, that many people would say that Raila Odinga, just like Uhuru Kenyatta, appears to have had a soft spot for Musalia Mudavadi over the years. I mean, whether you talk about what many observers call the rehabilitation after that KANU issue of 2002 that you talked about, when he lost to Karanga in Sabatia, or when you talk about the 2007. The two elections, as it were, 2007, 2017, where they have run together, there's a sense in which many people in Raila Odinga's camp may have been hoping that Musalia Mudavadi somehow, in the fullness of time, would come on their end. He hasn't. Now, to what degree is this a problem for that camp? We have seen they've tried certain alternatives. There was that elaborate ceremony at Bukungu where Francis Atwoli and a couple of other elders there basically saying, well, now it is Wycliffe Oparanya who is going to be the door through which people enter that place. But now there is Musalia Mudavadi. I mean, he has a name that most Kenyans recognize. But is there something that the Raila Odinga camp has lost in Musalia Mudavadi going to the DP?
Yes, there is. This is an optics blow on the Raila camp. Because the Raila camp has always shown that impression that Western Kenya is locked. Basically, every Western Kenya leader is with Raila Odinga, and and even the bulk of the support of the voters there would be in the Raila camp. So, in terms of image, it's a blow to Raila Odinga that Musalia Mudavadi, whom he was still courting, and he has done that publicly. Remember in a recent event, I think it was a funeral, he did talk about their paths crossing again.
I think it's a mother's funeral, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah. And their paths crossing again, that we've worked together before and we will work together again in future. And back to the point you've made, yes, indeed, Musalia Mudavadi has had favor in both the Uhuru and Raila Odinga camps. Just in the same way also, Moi actually wanted him to progress politically. Remember, Musalia Mudavadi's political career would fit the analogy of succession politics and dynastic politics in Kenya, because his father died in 1989, and he was a member of, that's Moses Mudamba Mudavadi, died in 1989, and Musalia Mudavadi, who was just barely 29 years old.
He was 29 years.
Yeah, was 29 years old and was elected as MP for Sabatia, and straight away made cabinet minister for marketing and supplies. And he stayed in cabinet all the way to 2002. A very rewarding career, complete with the position of vice president. Never mind that it was the shortest in the history of the country, one of the shortest actually, because Murumbi didn't serve that long either. But Mudavadi actually had a very short term of about 2+ months as vice president. So there is something that I am sure Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga are very disappointed about Musalia Mudavadi. I'm sure the question they're asking is, how do you think, how do you function? You can't see that you belong here and your future is actually around this place. I think they're also quite puzzled. And because it looks like every time it comes so close, Musalia Mudavadi will jump out and further away from the Moi, Kenyatta, Odinga circles, which he actually belongs, considering the families that were dominant in the politics of the country. Really, if you can go back to the hustler versus dynasty narrative, you would know that Musalia Mudavadi is, by the political equivalent of Immaculate Conception, he is dynasty. He belongs there. So when Uhuru Kenyatta, and it's been reported by sections of the media that he says he's disappointed with Musalia Mudavadi, I think for them it is personal, because this is one guy who's supposed to be
a part of
in their circles, but who can't just see
like, where are you going?
It doesn't seem to understand, and he is doing his own things. And when you look at Raila Odinga, he seems to also have prepared for this moment in a way, because when you look at how he conducted Western Kenya politics with the help of Francis Atwoli and Oparanya, they seem to have started creating new centers of influence in, say, Governor Oparanya of Kakamega, sort of a fallback plan. And this was clear, especially during the Matungu by-election, where it emerged that indeed Raila Odinga and Musalia Mudavadi, ANC and ODM are competitors and not partners. The Matungu by-election actually brought that out. And what you've seen...
it became very chaotic, if you remember.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, and a very closely fought one.
Absolutely. And so you've seen the propping up of Governor Wycliffe Oparanya and the diminishing role of Musalia Mudavadi, because especially when they went to OKA, then really they were not available in the NASA circles where NASA was on the decline. So the Raila Odinga side can argue that, no, we prepared for this day and we have alternatives. And the other new alternative is the DAP party, Democratic Action Party of Kenya, which seems now to try and replace Ford Kenya as a NASA partner.
But it's interesting because they are hunting beyond the traditional sort of playing ground of Ford Kenya, because we saw the other day, for example, they had people like Kenneth Marende, you know, the former speaker in Vihiga. We've seen people like Ayub Savula from Lugari. And those typically used to be places where ODM would battle it out with ANC and not Ford Kenya. In a sense, Ford Kenya has been Bungoma and Trans Nzoia by and large, at least in the recent election. So it's a very interesting development there. Francis, just signifying how important, how significant Western Kenya is going to be in this election. I mean, everybody's trying to get a piece of it.
You're talking about 2 million votes or thereabout. That's a significant number for anybody who wants to be president. And that is also a region that has largely voted for Raila Odinga in the 3 general elections held 2007, 2013, 2017. Almost 67% of that vote basket went to Raila Odinga. And that time, you remember, he was with Wetangula and Musalia in 2017. Yeah. Musalia vied on his own in 2013, got about 440,000 votes. A good amount of it that came from that region. So you're talking about a very significant region politically. And this is also a region that has been raided heavily in the last few months by the deputy president, Raila Odinga still wanting to keep a hold of what he has had in the last 3 general elections. And here is now Musalia, who has also been trying to define himself as the leader politically of that region. And see what is happening. In the last, let's say the last 3-4 days, the DAP Kenya party has been largely raiding ANC. Even the MP for Matungu, Nabulindo, the one that LK is referring to, has also moved to DAP. It tells you something.
Nangabo today.
Nangabo today is the woman rep in Trans Nzoia. So DAP, which was initially seen...
Sabula, who's the deputy party leader. Yeah.
So for a party that was seen as being crafted to take care of Bungoma and Trans Nzoia counties, stretching a little bit to even net some of the MPs who are elected on an ANC ticket is significant. And also note that ANC was one of the political parties in 2017 that got quite a number of parliamentary seats in Western Kenya, including one in Busia, and another, actually 2 in Busia, Oku Kaunya and Bunyasi in Nambale. So defeating ODM candidates therein, even though ODM seemed like the dominant political party in Busia. So I would see a scenario where for Raila Odinga and his team, that which they are losing via Musalia and Wetangula, they're trying to recoup it through a political party like DAP. I wouldn't put it past a lot of government machinery working to prop a party like DAP. See, it is also, the party leader it is also led by
a cabinet secretary.
Eugene Wamalwa.
Absolutely.
So it's a game of alternatives. That which you're losing via Musalia and Wetangula, you try and get it through other mechanisms like the DAP party.
And maybe you might want to say that, just as Linus was saying, that maybe these are some of the things that they started to think about, because remember the members of DAP party were the ones who broke away from Ford Kenya, Eseli Simiu and Wafula Wamunyinyi. So when you take a look at that, these were things that perhaps, were already being put in place, well before, perhaps, taking a look at that.
Another reminder, you remember that attempted coup in Ford Kenya that was crafted not so far from where we are, around Arboretum, if you remember.
Oh, at least it's outside the studio.
Yeah, it's outside the studio. It was around Arboretum.
And outside the gate.
And one of the accusations that Moses Wetangula made was that there was a heavy hand.
And they were flown in, that's what he said.
That there was a heavy hand of one of the NASA leaders in the attempted coup.
Exactly.
Later, you will realize that he was referring to Raila Odinga. Some of those leaders who are now leaders of DAP at one point were seen at Capitol Hill. So I don't think these things, what we are seeing, the establishment of DAP Kenya and so on and so forth, is anything accidental. It's something that was choreographed, pre-planned, with some of these things probably in mind.
Well, I mean, there's no coincidence in politics. That's what they say. But one of the things which I think would be interesting to watch, because obviously Musalia Mudavadi and his influence in Western Kenya is actually what is on the table right now. And that is something that I think people will be watching going forward. Because in previous elections, that record hasn't been particularly great, at least at the presidential level. Obviously, in the last election, as you mentioned, there were quite a number of ANC candidates who won in different parts of Western Kenya. The last time when he ran in 2013, he didn't fare that well. I mean, he lost that region to Raila Odinga. Yeah. Even in the last election, there were ODM, I mean, Vihiga as an ODM governor, and the county assemblies there, majority of those MCAs and all of that. So that is the record that he has to overcome and say, I was running the last time around, I have, you know, been in this before. This time I may not be running. We still don't know because some of his members of parliament actually, we saw the other day people like Milemba, Omboko Milemba saying that he still is going all the way, and that's pretty confusing because, like we were saying, what happens if the DP sits ground for him? What does the DP become? So those are questions that a lot of their supporters will be dealing with, and I think they have a real task of reassuring, recalibrating how their supporters think to tell them this is what's happening. And I think that their opponents will be capitalizing on that confusion. And Yvonne, you're looking at me because this is interesting, that actually in two places, I mean, it's part of the analysis that I've seen, which is quite interesting, is that the entry of Musalia Mudavadi introduced a question in the minds of people in Western Kenya and in the minds of some people as well in Central Kenya, because there is this conventional wisdom that the running mate for Deputy President William Ruto, when he goes to the ballot, will almost without any doubt be from the mountain.
Right.
That therefore means that when you see Musalia Mudavadi, a fairly high-profile figure, coming to the DP side, the question is, what else could he get if not the running mate? Then you come to the question, okay, if he's a running mate, what happened to that conventional wisdom that he has to get a running mate from Central Kenya? And then on the other hand, in Western, they'll be asking, if he is not the running mate, then what is in it for us?
Right.
And I think that those two questions would explain why they have been on the road. The DP there announced that, you know, we will be going around. They went to Nakuru, then in Bungoma tomorrow, and the DP today has been in parts of Central Kenya.
And Kabete and Kiambu.
You know, and the idea is to reassure those bases that, look, this may have happened, but nothing much has really changed. In Western, they'll be saying,
what's changed?
Serikali ni kubwa. You know, that is what they usually tell people. If there's no specific thing you are being given, you'll be told, ingombe ni kubwa. Once we get this thing, there'll be many little rooms in here that you can find.
Ata mkia ni nyama.
Exactly.
But you see also in 2017, Joe, if you remember, Musalia Mudavadi was in the NASA team.
Yep.
He was not on the presidential ticket. It was Raila and Kalonzo.
Yep.
Actually, he became the chief campaign manager. But of course, with a promise for creation of a position once the NASA team got it at the ballot, which they didn't, though the election was nullified. That's a story for another day. So he can argue that just like he didn't vie in 2017 and opted to play as a member of a bigger team, he can say he's also doing the same in 2017. Not necessarily having his name on the ballot, but of course with a promise for creation of a position. You'll hear all manner of positions being dangled, chief minister and so on and so forth. But those are scenarios that are established once an election has been crafted. However, Unlike 2017, when we'll discuss that a little later, there's a political parties bill, act now, that is in place that requires you to submit a coalition agreement to the Register of Political Parties 120 days to the general election. Part of that agreement are the nitty-gritties of how that government will be structured, who gets what. So some of these things will not be a secret. So even as you go to elect your presidential candidate of choice, you will know who he or she is partnering with, in what terms, and in what kind of a structure. So some of these things that we ask ourselves, if they were to team up with the deputy president, what would Musalia become? Those are questions that will be fundamentally answered when that coalition agreement is out there, if the court does not overturn the law that was signed today by the president.
Yeah, and I wanted to just add, a few things, because now we're going into I think the next big question that everybody is going to be asking is, what are the details of the working relationship between, these three parties, Ford Kenya, ANC, and UDA? The details, from what we might understand, either have not been firmed up or have not been made public. One of the interesting things that ANC and Musalia himself said as well is that everybody who was invited to the NDC, the people who were invited, were not competitors. Does anyone remember that? So they were not competitors, and there were people they were working together with. And whoever was not invited, then you could infer that they were competitors. But yet Deputy President William Ruto was there. Deputy President William Ruto has been campaigning, and for all intents and purposes will be the UDA candidate. So then you start to ask yourself, if he's not a competitor, then what is he? And then we have Omboko Milemba saying, well, contrary to media reports, I think that was reported, was it on the front page of the Daily Nation earlier this week, saying that, this is the deal and Musalia will not be on the ballot. And they say, no, he in fact will be on the ballot. So you have a scenario where Deputy President William Ruto says he will be on the ballot. Musalia Mudavadi says he will be on the ballot. We've heard no indication from Deputy President William Ruto that he will not be on the ballot. He's done quite a bit, including forming this UDA party. But then there's another issue about, details of the deal, about zoning, where you have in a coalition agreement, one party says, no, you know what, we will not field candidates in a zone that we feel is a stronghold of our partners in the coalition, and allow them to continue to do that. But yet we heard on Daybreak just this week, Chris Mamala saying, we do advocate for zoning, but remember, in fact, was it in December of last year, the Deputy President was on record as saying, if we get into any agreement, there will be no zoning. UDA should be allowed to field candidates in just about any and every part of the country that UDA decides to field a candidate. So a lot of these nitty-gritty issues, then will be, I think, the crux of the matter going forward with respect to the relationship between these three parties. And like we've said, in 2017, Musalia was not on the ballot. If in 2022 he is not on the ballot, then what does he do for 2 election cycles that he has not been on the ballot in one form or the other? And how does he keep his hopes alive of possibly running for president in 2027?
Or 22. 27.
I know it's hard to remember. We're in 2022 already. Or 2032 for that matter. And so what does he do between now and then that sheds off the tag of, I'm the one supporting? There was the Madimoni tag that we talked about. There was 2002. There's 2017 that he didn't run. If he doesn't run in 2022, that'll be up to 4 times that he's, seeded it for somebody else. Some would say, it would be 4th time lucky. Mwai Kibaki has been the same, but remember, Mwai Kibaki was on the ballot, even if it's losing. So those are some of the questions I think that come up, especially with the details of it. And now that the details have not been made public, what happens if Musalia Mudavadi and Moses Wetangula are not happy with the details or with the end of the bargain that will be offered to them at the table with the talks with the UDA? Can they back out? We have 6.5 months to the election. Do they risk doing that? If they back out, what do? Do they go it alone, or do they maybe go to Azimio, or do they, so what happens?
Go back to Oka, maybe.
Or back to Oka. So I think it actually puts him in a difficult position considering the fact that this thing was announced before the details actually followed. And you could see in the fact that Deputy President William Ruto took to the podium and actually announced the next steps. So we're going to have rallies in Nakuru, we're going to go to Bungoma, and where are they going over the weekend after Bungoma on Friday? So you see, it's these things that are happening, and you start to get the sense of, okay, so who's in charge and who's driving this going forward? And there'll definitely be that power play. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the details of that deal will be, and what happens.
Interesting. I mean, I saw some quotes by, I think they were quoting Didmas Baraza about what happens here, and he said something like it is the
small river that drains into the big river.
The big river. and that's something that's
which is the small river,
which is the big one. Watch. Right. And I mean, you have to admit that the Deputy President is a master political operator.
Absolutely.
And he is... he's going to drive this. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here.
I mean, I don't think he came this far to only come this far.
He will drive it. I mean, he will drive it because he has had greater momentum than Musalia Mudavadi. So in a sense, it actually felt like Musalia was joining him. That's what the narrative has been. And even if you think about the base that listens to William Ruto right now compared to the base that perhaps listened to Musalia Mudavadi, I mean, many people would agree that, the partner, in this country, people don't like to hear this, but the senior partner in this coalition is actually going to be William Ruto. And I think that this coalition, Linus, is going to move at the pace of William Ruto.
That's right. And the aggregate conclusion we can make here is nothing has changed in terms of the narrative that the race as it stands today is between Deputy President William Ruto of UDA and Raila Odinga of Azimio. That is, Musalia Mudavadi has not changed that equation. And for the simple reason that he had UDA in his big day. Had Musalia Mudavadi gone to Bomas of Kenya on his own, made exactly the same speech, said exactly the same thing, you will have seen part of the analysis talking about a third force or a third horse.
Or a third option.
Or a third option. He would have opened a third route. But he opened it and closed it on the same day. It's a very interesting political strategy. I don't understand it. It could have spread over some time also to give him some momentum. He failed to do that because NDP, being the very smart politician he is, immediately took charge. And you will know with his tone, normally, it becomes a bit of a base, first of all, speaks like, the man in charge of the place, and then goes ahead and announces the schedule of events. So, who is joining whose events?
Yeah.
Small River joins Big River. Yeah.
Actually, if you're to look at it plainly, it was not Deputy President William Ruto joining Musalia Mudavadi. It was Musalia Mudavadi together with Moses Wetangula joining the Deputy President. And this will be the narrative that we'll continue to see. Of course, the fundamental question...
But is it okay also to assume that Moses Wetangula is a smaller river that joined Musalia Mudavadi on their way to
the Big River?
Tributaries.
Maybe. Tributaries and the river geography. We used to call it GHC back in the years. But I look at it this way. The next fundamental question that will be asked is, what does Musalia Mudavadi bring to the Deputy President's fold in terms of
numerically
speaking? How many more votes does he bring him that ordinarily he wouldn't have had if he had run the race alone? How many of the votes has Musalia Mudavadi denied ODM leader Raila Odinga? How many would he have taken to Raila? How many has he taken away from him and taken to the Deputy President? That's where also the mathematics will be. And for how long? And if he doesn't run for the presidency, what about the parliamentary seats? Because one of the other areas of strength for any party leader, as we have seen it in 2013 to 2017, 2017 to 2022, every time you've seen that photo of the president calling the national leaders, as he calls them, largely sometimes is about the stature of their political parties and the number of parliamentarians they have. Yeah. 14 MPs, 16 MPs, 21 MPs or thereabout. If there will be a question of zoning, in which areas? If there won't be a question of zoning, how will those parties compete? And the same challenge that would be in the Kenya Kwanza Alliance is the same challenge that would also be in Azimio. Because there are some areas that some of the parties who are members of Azimio would argue that this is our stronghold. Allow us to field candidates here. So, and you remember this act also provides for individual membership to those coalitions as well as corporate membership. So it is possible for a party that is a constituent member of a coalition to field its own candidates. So that is also a question, because in the event, for example, there is a fallout in any of these coalitions, one of your strengths will be the number of MPs that you have in the National Assembly and in the Senate, as well as in the county assemblies. So you will see a scenario where one of the main points of discussion for this coalition building will be allow us to field candidates in areas that we perceive to be our strongholds.
Interesting. I think we can quickly mention something about the Political Parties Amendment Bill, which is now actually an act, having been assented to by the President earlier today. This introduces interesting dynamics, and I think that contrary to popular belief, it is not going to be a preserve of Azimio to use. Actually, as a matter of fact, many people say it makes it easier for example, the ANC, UDA arrangement to work, because unlike previously where, you know, the NASA constituent parties, there used to be a term like that before Linus. They would complain that, you know, ODM ran away with all the political parties, the money that comes from the political parties fund, and, you know, we didn't know about it. There was no publication of that agreement and that sort of thing. But here now, parties that get votes in the election will get a piece of that money, but more importantly, there will be clear agreement between the parties on how to do things, so that no one can pull a surprise at the end of the day. This is what we've agreed, and it is deposited with the Register of Political Parties, and a few interesting clauses there that make it very tight in terms of dealing with some of the breaches of the gentleman's agreements that we've seen.
Absolutely. Actually, let's start with a soundbite from Sakaja during the Senate sitting last evening. You see, even after a few days after the Kenya Kwanza team took off, there would have been an expectation that there will be a working arrangement in terms of how the three parties will work in the new coalition in Parliament. But when Sakaja and team were voting, he actually said, while there was a feeling that this bill was meant to cushion Azimio, it will also help the Kenya Kwanza team in terms of coalition making. And so this law now provides a very interesting avenue for coalition making. Previously, coalitions have been very loosely tied. This time, you're being asked to put everything into writing. Coalition agreements like the ones we saw for CORD and the one that we saw for NASA in 2013 and 2017, particularly the 2017 agreement, you remember there was that argument about how enforceable is that coalition agreement. What if there were resources? What if they had, the NASA team had formed government, and in one way or another, like the gentleman's agreement of 2002 MOU, there was a breach? Which court would you have gone to? And how enforceable is that document? The difference now is that that document is legally binding, and it will have to be deposited, let's say, 4 months to the general election. So everybody will know, in this coalition or in this alliance, these are the specific details of how that structure will work. Obviously, there are a bit of challenging clauses in that act, but insofar as the question of coalition building is concerned, I think it will help what you call, let's say, the smaller political parties, because, quote unquote, they will not be played by the big partners in a coalition. That is one. Number two, there is the question of nominations. Actually, even the drama in the National Assembly was centered around mainly two issues: the question of coalition political parties and the question of nominations, where there is a provision now that only registered members of a political party will participate in nominations. That can work both ways. It can be good, it can be disastrous for some political parties. And it can also be disastrous for some of the aspirants, because you're saying, for example, if in Mombasa, you're being asked how many members of ODM are in Mombasa, how many members of UDA are in Mombasa, how many members of KANU are in Mombasa, those are the only ones who will participate in a nomination exercise. And a party being told no one else can participate. And if another person participates in political party primaries and is not a member, that constitutes an electoral illegality. So those are some of the interesting things that are going to happen. And how are the how are the membership registers currently? Are they to the polling station level? Are they to ward level, to constituency level, to county level? And in the event you find yourself as a member of a political party that you don't belong to, yet probably you wanted to seek an elective seat in another political party that you're not a member of, then you are locked out automatically. Those are some of the implementation issues that I would suspect will come up as we move on.
For me, I think just to highlight some of the issues, it's about, and this is what the proponents of the bill, now an act of parliament, talked about helping to institutionalize democracy and political parties by allowing them access to the fund, that it now makes it easier for political parties to be, eligible for the fund. So before that, a party needed to garner 20 MPs, 3 elected senators, 3 governors, and 40 elected members of county assembly. Now the threshold has been reduced, so instead of 20 MPs, now it's 1. Instead of 3 senators, 1. Instead of 3 governors, 1. Instead of 40 MCAs, it's now 1. And that is, I think, been sorted out in Clause 17. And so ensuring access to these funds, lowering the requirement, and the redistribution of party funds, I think that's one of the interesting ones. And then the other one, I guess, to deal with the issue of coalition parties and the constituent members therein, is something in Clause 10. Remember the one about party hopping? The one that said that you would be deemed to have resigned if you join in the formation of another political party, if you in any way publicly advocate for the formation of another party or promote the ideology of another party. So those were deleted, particularly with respect to a coalition party. So meaning if you're in coalition X that has parties A, B, and C, then you're able to tout the ideologies of party B and sort of stay within the coalition. So a number of those things I think that come up, and largely based on the experience of NASA, which was a particularly nasty one that led to then One Kenya Alliance and to where we are today, but will be beneficial considering now that we've got Kenya Kwanza on one end, we've got Azimio on another end, and who knows what other coalition will come in and hopefully register it 120 days to the election.
Mistrust is the currency of politics.
And this sought to cure that somewhat.
But you see, legislating to cure mistrust, it goes halfway. Because you will need to, the trust question is also a good behavior question. What do I mean by good behavior question? If you agree with somebody, we will walk this path this way, then it will be expected that you will live to that expectation. You may legislate, but if there is backstabbing, there is mistrust, it will go past.
Might it not be seen as a recognition of, you know, coalitions? Because we've had coalitions now, and many people have said in this country, if you want to win the presidency, if you want to, you know, get majority, you will need to go. No one is going to go it alone. And I believe since what 2002, we've had coalitions, and so maybe now it's time to say, let's legalize it.
And the lawyer in the room is here.
Why am I speaking?
You know, Johan Kriegler said...
No, I'm just enjoying how you are celebrating chaos.
Yes, I know Linus has very strong views about political parties.
Please proceed.
I do.
Please.
Yeah.
No, I think Robert has some instructions which you have to listen to now.
We must listen to that for another day.
Yeah.